Hello, and thanks for joining us on this teleconference call sponsored by Gun Owners of America. I'm Tim Macy, Chairman of Gun Owners of America, hosting today's conference call with United States Senator and presidential candidate Ted Cruz. This conference call is interactive, where you can push *3 on your phone, and all our screeners can get you set up to ask Senator Cruz questions, and everyone can hear your answers during the next hour. I don't think I have to tell anyone listening to this conference call that the U.S. Constitution has been stomped on and tossed out the window under the Obama administration. The sad truth is our elected officials swear to uphold the Constitution when they enter office, but in reality, most of them have never even read it. Gun Owners of America believes this is one of the main reasons why our country is in the shape it's in today, and we want to help bring this nation back to prominence. So during the next hour, if you'd like, you can push *3 on your phone, ask Senator Cruz questions on the gun issue, legislation, the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty, or why a Republican-controlled U.S. Senate confirmed anti-gun Loretta Lynch to replace Eric Holder as Attorney General. So let's get rolling and start off by introducing Senator Cruz. Thanks for being with us today, Senator.
Tim, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And let me thank each of you for joining this call. I appreciate your taking time away from your families to be part of the conversation about the threat to our constitutional liberties and about our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Let me start by just saying thank you to all the men and women of Gun Owners of America. GOA endorsed me early on when I ran for the Senate, and played a critical part in helping get me elected and sending me from the state of Texas to represent 27 million Texans and to stand up and to fight for our rights. And I'm grateful to be with each of you, because the men and women on this call are fighters. You are men and women of action. You are patriots. And this is a time when that is exactly what is needed in our country. I think all of us understand that America is facing a time of crisis. At home, we're seeing economic stagnation. We're seeing millions who are hurting and out of work. Abroad, we've seen America receding from the world, and the consequences of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy of leading from behind have been a manifest disaster, with radical Islamic terrorism on the rise and America's interests in jeopardy across the globe. And here at home, we've crossed a new threshold. We have seen the federal government targeting and violating the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens at a level never before seen in this country and never before imagined. And that has a great many Americans deeply concerned that we have strayed from our founding values. We have strayed from the principles that made America great. Now, I'll tell you, I am optimistic. I'm deeply optimistic that we're going to change the direction in this country, because I believe millions of Americans are waking up. They realize what we're doing doesn't make any sense. And we've got to get back to the common sense values, the free market principles and constitutional liberties upon which America was founded. I'm reminded a couple of months ago, I was in Iowa. I was having lunch with a number of grassroots activists, and one gentleman at the lunch table asked me a very simple question. He said, "Why should we trust you?" And I got to say, I think that is a profound question. It is a question that goes really to the heart of what I believe the 2016 Republican primary will be all about. I think it will be all about that one word, trust. That all of us are fed up with politicians who don't actually do what they said they would do. And I'll tell you my response is that I said to him, you shouldn't trust me or any other politician. Every one of us, you should say to us, don't tell me, show me. Show me where you have stood up and stood for the principles you supported. And indeed, I gave an example from the Senate campaign in the state of Texas. When I was campaigning for Senate, I would make the point over and over again that every politician running for office has a web page. And inevitably, the web page has an issues page on it. And at least in the state of Texas in the Republican primary, there'd be a series of issues, A, B, C, D, and E. And every politician would say essentially the exact same thing in response to each of them. And I pointed out that if anyone went to our webpage, tedcruz.org, one of the first things they discovered was we didn't have an issues page. Instead, we had a page that was labeled a proven record. And what it said was, for far too long, politicians have done one thing and said another. Every one of us should ask any candidate who shows up in front of us, you say you believe these principles. Show me. When have you stood up and fought for them? When have you bled for them? And what have you accomplished? As the scripture says, you shall know them by their fruits. And what it then said is, for the past decade, Ted has been fighting for conservative principles over and over again and winning on a national level. Colon. And what followed was 3 pages of bullet points on issue after issue after issue. And the example that I would typically employ on the campaign trail was the Second Amendment. Now, in Texas, every Republican running for office says he or she supports the Second Amendment. Unless you are clinically insane, that's the right answer in the state of Texas. I mean, heck, even the Democrats say they support the Second Amendment in the state of Texas. Now, I would point out on the campaign trail that I actually didn't say on the website that I supported the Second Amendment. I didn't say a word about what was hidden in the deep recesses of my heart. What I did say is that when I served as the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the United States Supreme Court, that I led a coalition of states in front of the U.S. Supreme Court defending the individual right to keep and bear arms, and together we won a landmark 5-4 victory, the Heller case, upholding that fundamental right. Then it linked to the 2010 Carter Knight Freedom Fund Award given by the NRA each year to one of the leading defenders of the Second Amendment. That, I think, is the difference between someone who mouths the words they support the Second Amendment and someone who has a record of standing and fighting. You know, I had a former boss who used to say, if I'm ever accused of being a Christian, I'd like for there to be enough evidence to convict you. I think the same thing is powerfully true of being a conservative. If you really support the Second Amendment, you will have stood and fought. And I'll point out that given that record, the people of Texas made the decision to entrust me with representing them in Texas. And just a few months after I arrived in the Senate, we saw President Obama take advantage of the terrible shooting in Sandy Hook, not to try to go after violent criminals, which is what we should have done, but instead to target the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. And I was proud to stand alongside my friend, Senator Mike Lee and Senator Rand Paul, in helping lead the fight to defend the Second Amendment. We stood up together and we said, we will filibuster any legislation that undermines the Second Amendment. Now, when we did that, there were an awful lot of folks in Washington, including a lot of Republicans, who said this fight was unwinnable. I promise you, if you had to come and sit through the Senate Republican lunches for just a day or two, you'd be ready to jump out the window. So many people were saying, after this terrible school shooting, the momentum is all on the Democrat side. We just need to get out of the way and let them pass this legislation. But we stood up and said, no. We will fight with every breath in our body to defend the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment. And an interesting thing happened. When we did that, the media immediately began decrying it as a futile and hopeless act. But what it did is it slowed things down, and it shined the light on the Democrats' effort to undermine the Second Amendment. What happened then is the men and women on this call began standing up. It was right before a 2-week recess. All the senators went back to their home states. They began holding town halls, and their citizens were standing up saying, hey, these 3 guys are standing for the Second Amendment. Where are you? How come you're not standing for the Second Amendment? Over the next couple of weeks, the 3 senators on that letter grew to 17. We then came back and we had the very first procedural vote. The first procedural vote, we got 31 votes. Now, we needed 41 to stop what the president was doing. So the media and the Democrats immediately declared victory. They declared we had lost, the Second Amendment had lost, and the president's gun control efforts were going to be victorious. But it was very interesting, as most of y'all fully understand. Wars are not typically won in a single skirmish. Those 31 senators created a whip count. Everyone that had voted no had voted against the Second Amendment. Suddenly, it was plain as day to see, and heaven and earth opened up. Those senators' phone lines began melting down, emails and Facebook and Twitter, and they began hearing from their constituents over and over again, do not sell out the Bill of Rights. It was incredible, the power of the grassroots, the power of the men and women on this call, holding our elected officials to account. And because the grassroots rose up in overwhelming numbers and said, we want to defend the Bill of Rights, we want to defend the Second Amendment, when it came time for a vote, every single one of President Obama's unconstitutional efforts to restrict the Second Amendment was voted down on the Senate floor. That's an example of the leadership from we the people. And it's also an example of why I'm optimistic going forward for our country, why I'm optimistic for the 2016 election, because I believe that same force, the grassroots, millions of courageous conservatives standing up and saying, enough is enough, we want to get back to our founding principles. I think that's the only force strong enough to pull this country back from the abyss. And I'll tell you, I'm encouraged because of each of you, because of your passion to restore this last best hope for mankind, this nation that we love so much, the United States of America. And with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions you like.
Thanks, Senator. That was great. We've got a lot of folks already on the line wanting to ask questions. I want to remind everybody that in this format, it's much easier if you make it a simple single question and not a 2 or 3 part question, because it gets confusing trying to go through this process in that way. So if you can make them single questions, it helps a lot. I'd like to open up by actually asking the first question. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your life and what made you decide to go into politics, which most people would say it'd be a horrible thing to do?
Well, Tim, thank you for that question. I'm happy to. I grew up in Texas, and a big part of who I am and why I ran for office has to do with my family story. My mother's Irish and Italian. She was born in Wilmington, Delaware, and in a working class family. Her mother was the second youngest of 17 kids. And my mom became the first person in her family ever to go to college. She went to Rice University, graduated in 1956 with a math degree, and went to work as a computer programmer at Shell. And she was really a pioneer in the computer industry. My dad was born in Cuba, and my dad as a kid fought in the Cuban Revolution. And he fought actually alongside Fidel Castro. Now, he didn't realize that Castro was a communist. None of the kids fighting did. They just knew that Batista was a cruel dictator. When my dad was a teenager, he was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. He was beaten almost to death. And my father fled Cuba in 1957, and he came to Texas. At the time, he was just 18. He couldn't speak English. And he had $100 sewn into his underwear. He got a job washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked full-time. He paid his way through school. And he ended up starting a small business, working towards the American dream. Today, my dad's a pastor based just outside of Dallas. Now, many of you all may have gotten to know my father because he travels the country speaking about the need to stand up and defend our liberty, and in particular about the need for people of faith to be involved in the political process and stand up for the Judeo-Christian values that our country was built upon. What you asked why I entered politics, and I'd say it's really 2 things. Number one, when I was in high school, I got very involved in a group called the Free Enterprise Institute, Houston, that had high school students study free market economics, read Milton Friedman and Hayek and Bastiat and von Mises, and study the Constitution. And we memorized the Constitution in short and mnemonic form. And I spent all 4 years of high school touring the state of Texas speaking on free market economics and the Constitution. And so my passion for constitutional liberties has been with me since I was a teenager. That became the beginning of the intellectual foundation for what I wanted to do in life, which is if you'd asked me as a teenager, what do you want to do? I would have said, I want to defend free market principles and I want to defend the Constitution. But the second major impetus was the personal and emotional aspect, which is my father's experience having fled tyranny and oppression and having come to America seeking freedom had a powerful effect on me. He used to say to me over and over again, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? And the answer is there is no place to go. And that is why I ran for office, to stand and fight for our constitutional liberties. And it's why I'm running for president now, because I believe our country is at a crisis point where it is now or never. And I also believe that 2016 is an election very much like 1980. I think there are striking similarities between Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. And the way to win is just like Ronald Reagan said, to paint in bold colors and not pale pastels. I think if we nominate another candidate in the mold of a Bob Dole or a John McCain or a Mitt Romney, all of whom are good, honorable men, but what they did didn't work. Every time we run to the mushy middle, we lose. And I agree with Ronald Reagan, who said we must paint in bold colors and not pale pastels. That's why I'm running, and that's one of the things I love about GOA is GOA has never been accused of painting in pale pastels. You understand that when it's our
Did we lose a senator? We may have lost a senator. He should be back on in just a second.
Tim, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, there you are. Okay. Well, great. Let's go ahead and start taking our questions from some of our callers. Some of them have been on quite a few minutes already waiting to talk to you. To start off, we're going to go to Mr. Reed Coleman in Louisiana. He's got a question for you. Can you hear us, Reed?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead.
Senator Cruz, one of the questions I have for you is what assurances do we have from you that you will uphold the Constitution that you're sworn to protect when you take your oath of office? I have watched, I don't know how many countless presidents take that oath and swear to uphold it, and then they trample it. So that is my question to you.
Well, Reed, I thank you for that question, and I think that's exactly the question you should ask of every candidate. And the best assurance that I can give you is that I have spent my entire adult life fighting to defend the Constitution. And every one of us has seen politicians who talk a good game. Every politician is going to claim they're going to defend the Second Amendment. They're going to claim they're going to defend the Bill of Rights. And you're right. Over and over again, they fail to stand for principle. And so what I would urge every one of us to ask every candidate is show me your record of standing and fighting over and over and over again. If you really are a conservative, if you really are fighting to defend constitutional liberties, you will bear the stripes. You will have been in the foxholes fighting. And that's how we will know, because you have been standing. And the difference, frankly, I think the most important difference between me and the other candidates who are running, there are a lot of good candidates running on the Republican side, a lot of people who I like and respect, senators and governors who are young, inspirational leaders. But the most important difference, I believe, between my record and their record is on issue after issue after issue, I have stood and fought for conservative principles and endeavored to lead the fight. If you think of the dozen biggest fights of the last couple of years, whether it's Obamacare or our debt or executive amnesty or the First Amendment, free speech, religious liberty, or privacy, or the Second Amendment, the 10th Amendment and Common Core, or foreign policy, standing up to stop radical Islamic terrorism, standing up to defend Israel, standing up to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. On every one of those issues, I have endeavored to stand and lead. And if you look to the other candidates and ask on which of those issues have they led, most of the candidates, you'll find one issue, maybe two. But on the vast majority of the issues, they don't have a record of standing and fighting to lead. And I'll say this also, Reed. You know, what I've endeavored to do in the Senate at the core is really two things. Number one, tell the truth. And number two, do what I said I would do. And that has been the record that I have built and developed, and I think it is the reason we're seeing such incredible excitement for the campaign. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people coming to tedcruz.org, signing up, volunteering. And I want to mention to you, we've created a special splash page for folks on this call, which is tedcruz.org/GOA. Let me give that to you again. It's tedcruz.org/GOA. We have a national petition to stand and defend the Second Amendment. We also have linked to there a raffle that we're raffling off the opportunity for people to come and go shooting with me and enjoy the exercise of our Second Amendment rights together. And so I would encourage each of you to come to tedcruz.org/GOA, sign up and join us in fighting to defend the Second Amendment and every one of our constitutional rights.
All right, great. Thanks, Reed. Thanks for the question. Before we go to our next question, I want to welcome the people that have joined on since we started. This is a teleconference call sponsored by Gun Owners of America with Senator Ted Cruz. If you want during this conference call to ask the Senator a question, please push *3 on your phone, and one of our screeners will try to get you set up to ask a question. Thanks. Let's go to Mr. Gregory O'Neill, and he's got a question for you, Senator. Hang on.
Senator.
Mr. O'Neill, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, great. Go ahead.
Thanks for taking my call. My question is to you, Senator. When you become president, when you're elected president, how will you get Congress back in line to follow the Constitution and abide by it?
Well, Gregory, it is a terrific question, and thank you for asking, and thank you also for the words of encouragement and your help helping us win the election. We've got to get back to the Constitution, and you've got two different elements of what we're seeing. Well, actually three. Right now, all three branches of government are disregarding the Constitution.
Correct.
You've got Congress, as you rightly noted, that regularly ignores the limits on its constitutional authorities. You've got the courts, and the Supreme Court in particular, that regularly engages in judicial activism and oversteps its authority. And then you have, worst of all, the executive, the President of the United States, President Obama, who has proven to be the most lawless president we have ever seen, and who has routinely abused his power. I think we need to change all three of those. You know, I would note one of the very first things that happened when I was in the United States Senate is we were having hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee on Dianne Feinstein's legislation, her so-called assault weapons ban. And I was leading the fight to stop that, and she and I had an exchange which you may be familiar with, where she was proposing banning so-called assault weapons, and her legislation specified some 2,000 weapons that were or were not included in the ban. And I asked her at the markup on that. I said, Senator Feinstein is no doubt aware that the Second Amendment to the Constitution says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And that phrase, the right of the people, when the framers used it, is a term of art. It referred in every instance to an individual right of individual citizens. Thus, in the First Amendment, when it says the right of the people to peaceably assemble, that's an individual right. And likewise, in the Fourth Amendment, when it says the right of the people to be free from unreasonable search and seizures, that's an individual right.
That is correct.
And so I asked Senator Feinstein if she believed Congress had the power to specify which guns were protected and which gun owners were protected by the Second Amendment. Did she believe Congress also had the power to specify which books were protected by the First Amendment or which homes were protected by the Fourth?
Very good question.
And you may recall the exchange where she got very, very upset and responded angrily that she was not a sixth grader. And she explained to me when we went back and forth. She said to me, Senator, you don't understand. It's our job to pass laws. It's the court's job to figure out if they're constitutional. And sadly, I do understand that has been Congress's attitude. We need a president who begins with obligation number one, follow the Constitution. That should be our touchstone. Yes. With respect to Congress, we need a president who asks those questions over and over again and is willing to veto legislation that violates the Constitution. With regard to the courts, and especially the Supreme Court, we need a president who will appoint judges who will follow the law and not legislate from the bench and try to impose their own personal policy preferences on the democratically elected legislatures.
I agree 100%.
And critically following the abuse of power from President Obama, we need a president who will follow the Constitution no matter what. And the good thing is, President Obama likes to say he has a pen and a phone. Well, if you live by the pen, you die by the pen. And the very first thing I intend to do if I'm elected president on my first day in office is to rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action taken by President Obama.
Hear, hear. I am with you.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you.
So let's go to our next caller, Alan Ray. He's got a question for you, Senator.
Thanks to GOA for this forum, and Senator, thank you for standing for our rights in the United States Senate, and of course taking on a presidential campaign for you and your family. I did have the opportunity to meet you and your family when you came to South Carolina, and I know it's a lot of work and certainly a huge sacrifice. My question to you is that we have a constitutional attorney in the Oval Office now. Is it going to take another constitutional attorney like yourself to get us out of the mess that we're in?
Well, Alan, thank you for the very kind question. It's good to visit with you again. I'll tell you briefly that before getting to your exact question, Heidi and I and the girls, we feel really privileged to have the chance to be running. You're right that it is an enormous amount of time. It is our entire family stepping into a maelstrom for the next 2 years. But I got to tell you, I jump out of bed every day, astonished and thrilled to have the opportunity to be in the arena. Our country is in crisis, and I wake up every day amazed at the blessings that have given me the chance to stand with you, to stand with each of you on this call, and to fight to turn our country around. I feel it is an incredible privilege to have the chance to do that. Now,
Amen.
with respect to the damage to the Constitution by this lawless president, it has been enormous. It has been unprecedented, and I do think one of the real distinctions in the Republican primary is going to be which of the candidates has a background, has the experience, has the track record of standing and fighting for the Constitution and fighting for the Bill of Rights. And that's something I have spent over 2 decades doing. One of the things in the last couple of years, I was the ranking member on the Constitution Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We put out a series of 5 reports chronicling the lawlessness of the Obama administration, chronicling 76 different lawless acts that were abuses of power, violations of federal law, or abuses of the Constitution. And I do think we need a commander-in-chief who understands the Constitution, who has the depth and experience and background to be able to right the ship, to get us back to the fundamental principles that protected our liberty and built this country. And that has been my passion my entire life.
Well, thank you, and Godspeed, Senator. We appreciate your efforts, and of course your wife and your family sacrifice for allowing you to be on the campaign trail.
Well, thank you, Alan.
Thanks a lot. Okay. So we've got another question. This one you ought to like. It's from Mr. Lloyd Friedman. I think this one will be an easy answer for you, Senator.
You know my last name.
Mr. Freeman, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned, Mr. Cruz, you mentioned the Heller case. Does that only work in somebody's home?
Absolutely not. The text of the Second Amendment is unambiguous. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I am very much a believer that shall not be infringed means shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment doesn't say you can keep arms just in your home, and bearing arms, by its explicit term, implies bearing them outside your arms. People don't typically bear arms in their home. They bear arms when they leave their home. And we need to honor the Bill of Rights.
Well, I live in New Jersey, and that's not going to work.
Well, look, you live in a challenging state, and it's true that there are a lot of jurisdictions, particularly jurisdictions that have been under the control of the Democrats for a long time, that have a long pattern of violating our rights. But I do think that the American people are waking up, and it will take a movement from the people to turn us around. Heller obviously arose in the District of Columbia, which had the strictest gun control laws of any jurisdiction in the country. The follow-up case, the McDonald case, arose in the city of Chicago, which was right up there with D.C. Now, the men and women on this call are not surprised by the obvious fact that Washington, D.C. and Chicago have had consistently among the very, very highest crime rates and murder rates across the country. Because when you disarm the citizenry, even in the face of oppressive efforts at regulation, those cases were successful. I think we are having continuing legal battles to protect the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, and I certainly intend to continue leading that fight in the Senate for the next year and a half, and then I very much hope from the White House, think what a change it would be. Instead of the federal government violating our rights, which we're seeing over and over and over again in the Obama administration, this is the most politicized, partisan Department of Justice we've ever seen. Think what a change it would be to see the federal government standing and fighting to defend our constitutional rights. A president who takes seriously his oath to uphold the Constitution. And that will make a meaningful difference even in challenging jurisdictions like New Jersey. Although I'll make a final point, which is, with respect to the state of New Jersey, I recall right at the beginning of my tenure in the Senate, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, you may recall, sent letters to two large financial institutions, which had lines of credits to two major gun manufacturers, threatening to come after them unless the banks cut off the lines of credits to the gun manufacturers. And he was doing so in an effort to coerce the gun makers to support President Obama's unconstitutional gun control laws. And at the time, I took the opportunity to respond by sending a letter both to the banks and to the gun manufacturers, observing that in the state of Texas, we have a more humble view of elected officials, that it is not the job of elected officials to shake down private businesses and force them, dragoon them in to the political lobbying efforts of elected officials. And I pointed out to the gun manufacturers that if the mayor was successful in this intimidation effort, that I was confident there would be financial institutions in the state of Texas that would be eager to earn their business, and I would be happy to personally introduce them to the heads of those financial institutions. And then secondly, I said to the banks, if you're tired of being in a jurisdiction where your government is trying to shake you down and thinks you work for them instead of the other way around, we would welcome you in the great state of Texas. So I suppose I would extend that invitation as well, that if all else fails in New Jersey, we would be happy to have you come join us in Texas.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
All right, great, thanks. So next we have Mr. Laydick from Pennsylvania who has a question for you, Senator. You there, Mr. Laydick?
Laddick, yes. Thank you for taking my call. Yes. Senator, God willing, if you're elected president and therefore head of the executive branch of government, what would you do to rein in out-of-control regulatory agencies such as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms?
Yep.
We know that Article 1 of the Constitution says that all legislative power rests with Congress, but unfortunately, since the 1970s, we've been a nation of code law, promulgated by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. So my question to you is, what specifically would you do to rein in bureaucrats making law as the head of the executive branch of government?
Let me say that is a terrific question, and I just have to make an initial observation, which is that is a more sophisticated question and has a better understanding of the constitutional structure than virtually any member of the United States Senate, all but a handful of members of the United States Senate, could not explain with the clarity you just did. You're absolutely right. We have an out-of-control regulatory branch. We've seen in the past several decades the rise of unelected bureaucrats, and ATF is an example of that. We've got the EPA, we've got the FCC, we've got the alphabet soup of agencies in Washington. And what has happened is they have stripped the executive power from the president. You have unelected bureaucrats that promulgate regulations and rules that have never been voted on by Congress, that take away our liberties, and that many of these unelected bureaucrats view themselves as the real controllers of government, that the politicians come and go, but no matter what, the regulations keep growing and growing. And indeed, many of us have observed ruefully that when Democrats are in power, government spending and debt and regulations grow like crazy. And when Republicans are in power, they still grow. They just grow a little bit more slowly. Indeed, a cynical friend of mine once suggested a bumper sticker. Republicans, we waste less. Hardly a banner to march into battle under. What President Obama has done that is wrong in abusing executive power is he's intruded into Article 1. Article 1 gives Congress the power to legislate. And what President Obama over and over again keeps doing is trying to change the laws, trying to unilaterally alter the laws, intruding into Article 1 of the Constitution. However, and this was explicit in your question, Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, but also the authority to be the sole executive, that all executive power is vested in one president. We have never seen a president willing to use the full Article 2 authority of the president to go after the regulatory state, to fundamentally shrink the authority of the unelected bureaucrats. And one thing I can commit to you is that if I'm elected, that is exactly what I intend to do, to rein back the regulators that have descended like locusts on small businesses that are killing jobs and opportunity across this country, to pull back the regulators that are strangling farms and ranches, the out-of-control EPA that is hammering economic growth, but also to use the full Article 2 authority of the president so that when I leave office, it is my intention that there will be substantially fewer regulations than when I entered office, not the other way around as has been the case over and over again. And I think the most critical piece for that is strong executive leadership. Now, you can do also legislative pieces, like I'm an original sponsor of the REINS Act, which is legislation that says any regulation imposing more than $100 million in cost has to be affirmatively approved by Congress. I think that's valuable legislation. But a great deal of this can be done by a strong president willing to use his constitutional authorities to rein in the out-of-control bureaucrats.
All right.
Well, thank you very much, Senator.
Great. Thanks. Just reminding everybody, if you want to join in and ask the senator a question, hit *3 on your phone, and one of our screeners will get you set up to hopefully get you on with the senator before we're done. We've got one person here, Bill, who's been on the phone for over half an hour, so we're going to see if we can't get Bill talking. Can you hear me, Bill?
This is Bill. How are you, sir?
Okay, great. You're there. So go ahead.
Senator Cruz, first of all, I want to thank you for everything you've done to stand up for the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Glad to see you're a candidate, certainly one way back, because you've proven that you're a man who says what you mean and means what you say. My question is why a Republican-controlled majority would approve somebody like Loretta Lynch to the Attorney General's office when she's obviously a clone copy of Eric Holder.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for that question. Thank you for the kind words of encouragement. I could not agree with you more passionately. And the simple answer is the Republican Senate should not have confirmed Loretta Lynch. It was an abdication of our duty to do so. I led the effort to defeat the Loretta Lynch nomination in the Judiciary Committee on which I served. I engaged in extensive questioning of Ms. Lynch to ascertain her record and ascertain what position she would take. And I'll confess, at the outset, I wanted to be able to support Loretta Lynch. I think Eric Holder has been the most partisan, abusive attorney general the country had ever seen, and I would have been thrilled for the Senate to confirm a new attorney general who would actually uphold the rule of law. But in the course of the hearings, I endeavored to determine if Loretta Lynch would do so. And so I asked Ms. Lynch, is there any way in which she would differ from Eric Holder? Her answer was none whatsoever. I pressed her in particular if she could articulate any constitutional limits whatsoever on the president's authority. She was unable to do so. I asked if she supported the president's unconstitutional executive amnesty. She said yes. I asked if, under her understanding, the theory that the president asserts on executive amnesty of refusing to apply the law to enforce immigration law against 4 million people here illegally, I asked, under her understanding of that theory, could the president extend executive amnesty to all 12 million people here illegally? She refused to answer that question. I asked a follow-up question. I said, under your theory of prosecutorial discretion, could a subsequent president instruct the Treasury Department to use prosecutorial discretion to no longer collect taxes in excess of 25%? Great policy, mind you, but plainly contrary to the tax laws. She refused to answer that question. I tried to come up with an even more absurd hypothetical. I said, could the next president, exercising prosecutorial discretion, instruct the federal government not to enforce any federal environmental laws or labor laws against any citizen of the state of Texas? Now, for anyone actually reading the Constitution, that is a very easy question. The answer is, of course not, because the Constitution places a responsibility on the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. She refused to answer that question. On question after question after question, I raised, was she willing to stand up to the president when it came to the IRS targeting individual citizens? I asked Ms. Lynch if she was willing to appoint an independent prosecutor, a special prosecutor, rather than what Eric Holder has done, is assign that investigation to a partisan Democrat and a major Democratic donor who's given over $6,000 to President Obama and the Democratic Party. And unsurprisingly, that investigation into the partisan abuse of power by the IRS and the Obama administration has gone nowhere. She refused to answer that question. And accordingly, I publicly called on every Republican to vote against her. I gave passionate remarks in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I gave passionate remarks on the floor of the Senate, and indeed wrote a long op-ed laying out the bill of particulars why no senator, Republican or Democrat, could vote to confirm Loretta Lynch consistent with his or her oath of office. I'm sorry to say the reason Loretta Lynch was confirmed as Attorney General is because Republican leadership wanted to confirm her. And I, on the Senate floor, asked the question that a whole lot of people are asking. We just had a big election in November, an historic election where 9 new Republican senators were elected, and we retired Harry Reid as majority leader. And a lot of people who worked very hard are saying, what the heck difference does it make when the Republican majority confirms the exact same Attorney General Harry Reid the Democrats would have confirmed? And I got to tell you, leadership had no good answer to that. So I share your frustration. I share your outrage. And I think the only answer is to continue to shift power from Washington back to we the people. That's really what our presidential campaign is trying to do. I think Washington is hopeless. It's broken. And it's a bipartisan problem. I've said many times the biggest divide we've got politically is not between Republicans and Democrats. It is between career politicians in Washington in both parties and the American people. And this presidential campaign, more than anything else, we are trying to empower millions of courageous conservatives to stand up and say, let's get back to the Bill of Rights, let's get back to the Constitution, let's get back to the fundamental liberties that built America.
Thank you very much, Senator, and God bless.
God bless you.
All right. We're actually running out of time. I feel bad for everybody who's been waiting so long, but Senator is on a tight schedule, and we're going to have to close things down. Senator, what else would you like to say before we close this teleconference out?
Well, Tim, I just want to close the way I opened, which is thanking each of you. The men and women on this call, you are standing up and making a difference in our country. And I recognize that these are dire times, that the threats to our liberty are unprecedented, but I am incredibly, powerfully, profoundly optimistic because of each of you. There is power in standing and fighting for principle. It's what terrifies career politicians in Washington. There is power in the men and women of GOA. I would encourage each and every one of you, please come to our website, tedcruz.org/GOA. Again, that's tedcruz.org/GOA. Sign up, join us, volunteer, sign our national petition, enter the raffle to have an opportunity for us to go shooting together, and stand up and speak out. You know, I'll tell you, the response we've seen to our presidential campaign has been nothing short of breathtaking. We launched on March 23rd. Immediately after the launch, Heidi and I and our daughters, we went on a barnstorming tour of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. Everywhere we went was standing room only crowds. The local press was reporting that the crowds coming out to see us were substantially larger, in many cases double the size of the crowds coming out for other candidates. I had a great chance up in New Hampshire to go to a shooting club where Heidi and I got to unleash some full autos, including seeing my beautiful petite blonde wife wearing a pink hat that said "Armed and Fabulous" as she emptied Full Auto magazine. That energy and excitement from the grassroots is what it will take to turn this country around. Now, when we launched the campaign, the mainstream media immediately had an apoplexy. The mainstream media, the New York Times said, the Cruz campaign cannot win because the Washington elites despise him. Now, I got to tell you, I kind of thought that was the whole point of the campaign. I've said a whole lot of times, if you think things are working great in Washington, if you think we need someone just to fiddle around the edges but not change the fundamental direction of the country, then I ain't your guy. But if you think Washington is fundamentally broken, if you want to bring power back to we the people and out of Washington, that's what this campaign is all about. And I'll give you a sign of just what we're seeing. Part of the reason the New York Times said we couldn't win is they said, okay, sure, the grassroots may be with Cruz, but at the end of the day, they can't raise any money. The Washington elites control all the money, and they're going to give the money to other candidates in this race. There are other Republicans the Washington elites like better. With no money, they can't win. Well, we launched the campaign on March 23rd. We had 1 week to go to the end of the quarter on March 31st, and we set a goal. We wanted to raise $1 million in a week. Now, frankly, I thought that was a pretty audacious goal. $1 million in the bank in a week, I thought would be a strong statement. We're going to have the resources to go the distance to get our conservative message out. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, we failed in that goal. We didn't raise $1 million in a week. We raised $1 million in 1 day. By the third day, we'd raised over $2 million. By the end of the week, we had raised over $4.3 million. Now, that consisted of over 51,000 contributions from all 50 states, people who had come to tedcruz.org who had contributed. 95% of those contributions were $100 or less. Now, to put that in context, $4.3 million in 1 week is more money in the opening week of a campaign than any Republican candidate has raised in modern times. That is double what Mitt Romney raised in 2012, and he had all the Washington elites behind him. It is much more than double what John McCain raised in his opening week in 2008. That is the power of the grassroots. It's the power of the men and women on this call. And so that's why I thank you for standing up, for speaking out, for going to tedcruz.org/GOA, for signing up, and for standing together as we fight to defend our constitutional liberties. I think it is now or never. And I'm convinced together we're going to pull back from this cliff. We're going to get back to our fundamental liberties, and every one of us is committed to ensuring that our kids and our grandkids have a better America than we did. They have the rights that we were blessed to have. That's what we're fighting to defend. And so, Tim, I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank GOA for standing up and speaking the truth. And I want to thank each of you for the courage of your convictions. It is a profound honor to stand alongside each of you. God bless you.
Well, Senator, I can tell you from us, thank you for doing this today. And by looking at the questions on our question-answer period here, I can see there's a whole lot of people out there praying that whoever is elected president, they get rid of Obamacare first and foremost. It seems to be the question of the day.
Well, and I'll make a final point on that, Tim, since if you're going to give me that kind of hanging curveball, I can't resist. If there is one thing I have led the fight on more than anything else in the Senate, it is to repeal every single word of Obamacare. And the sad reality is there are a lot of politicians in Washington, Democrats and especially Republicans, who are resigned to Obamacare being a permanent feature of our economy. Every 2 years they'll campaign on repealing Obamacare, but they don't intend to do it. I would encourage each of you, listen to the other Republican candidates running for 2016. Most of them don't mention Obamacare. Go watch their announcement speeches. See how little they mention Obamacare. We've had 3 elections since Barack Obama was elected. 2 of them, 2010 and 2014, repealing Obamacare was the number one issue, and we won historic tidal wave elections. In between, in 2012, we sought out and nominated the one man on the face of the planet who had actually designed and implemented a program just like Obamacare, and we got clobbered. In 2016, I promise you, if a Republican candidate is not campaigning every day, every place he or she goes on repealing Obamacare, they ain't going to do it. And the only way we're going to get that done, and I'm convinced in 2017 we will repeal this abomination of a law, but the only way we'll get that done is if there is a grassroots movement akin to the Reagan Revolution so that we come out of November 2016 with a mandate. I intend to make this an election or a referendum on repealing Obamacare and on adopting a simple flat tax and abolishing the IRS. And if you get a mandate from the people, that's how you change the rules in Washington. That's how we get real, meaningful change.
Great. Thanks, Senator. Thanks for being on with us.
Thank you. God bless you.
All right. For everybody else on the call who's still listening in, make sure you go to tedcruz.org/GOA and check up on everything the Senator's doing. The other thing you can do is go to gunowners.org and keep your eyes open to see when we'll do our next Tele-Town hall, and with folks talking about the Second Amendment and what we're trying to do to save it. Thanks, everybody, for joining in.